Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Reed Coverdale, and you're watching The Naturalist Capitalist, and I've got a special guest on the show today, Niko House. How's it going, Niko?
I'm doing well, Reed. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. So, being a Tulsi Gabbard supporter in the Democratic primary, I know a lot about you, and I'm assuming some of my followers will know who you are, but a lot of them probably won't. So, why don't you just, in a couple minutes, just describe why you're politically active, what motivated you, and what you've been doing recently?
So most recently, most people know me as being a surrogate for Tulsi Gabbard's 2020 primary race. I was also the create founder and president of the largest Bernie Sanders organization in 2016, which was the Carolina Students for Bernie at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I was also the acting state director until February for Bernie's campaign until February of 2016. Which is whenever the campaign started plummeting. No coincidence, just kidding. But seriously, nah, we had a mole basically, and she was the one who ended up taking over for me, and I couldn't really do anything about it, which sucked. But which also led to the next thing I was involved in, which is the DNC fraud lawsuit that I co-founded with Jared and Elizabeth Lee Beck. Um, I have my own political broadcast network called DMCSC Network, where I have my show, the Convo Couch, Uncontrolled Opposition with Robbie Yeager. We have just a lot of shows where we dedicate our time, kind of holding both sides accountable, but primarily holding the left accountable because it seems to be such a taboo thing to do nowadays, which is unfortunate because if you ask me, a lack of accountability on the left when it comes to people like the Democrats is exactly how we continue to end up in these situations. They seem to be cyclical at this point because every time we get to a point where we actually have leverage, we give up that leverage for nothing.
All right. So the Democratic primary this past year with Tulsi Gabbard, this was the first time I'd ever worked on a campaign. And back in 2012, I certainly saw the roadblocks they threw at Ron Paul, but I wasn't as aware as I was this year when I was actually involved, realizing all the benchmarks we were really pushing to get her to, and then as soon as she'd reach them, they'd raise the requirements or they just wouldn't even invite her to some events. And it
Yeah.
was really mind-boggling. Um, what was your experience with that? Did you see that at a higher level than you ever had before? Was this like the worst you'd ever seen them pull that bullshit?
I was actually talking to somebody from Tulsi's campaign last week, and we both said the same thing. Like I was part of Bernie's campaign in 2016. I saw some pretty uh, reprehensible stuff going on as far as the way he was treated, the way his supporters were treated, etc. But when we're looking at Tulsi, it was a different level because there was all of what Bernie dealt with, and then it was a hint of sexism. Then it was all that Bernie dealt with, and then it was a hint of Hinduphobia, and then there was all that Bernie dealt with, except for because Tulsi was more competent, in my opinion, when it comes to a lot of policy, especially foreign policy, and she just had this weird knack to be able to get people from the other side onto her side. It was even more ferocious because I truly believe the Democratic Party deemed her more of a threat than they deemed Bernie. At the end of the day, Bernie had basically nothing, and then just by running a campaign, he's set for life, and generations of his family are set for life. Tulsi was, as Van Jones described her, the next anointed queen of the Democratic Party, and instead of embracing that, she decided that if it meant she had to betray her morals and values, she wasn't going to do it. So, in other words, there's nothing that you can bribe her with. She's already had it all, and she gave it away, and that made her particularly dangerous, in my opinion. And so you would hear people lie. I mean, I was victim of the sexist attacks against Tulsi. People assume that because I supported Tulsi over Bernie Sanders, although I was still supportive of Bernie, but I held him accountable. But I was more supportive of Tulsi, and they said, "Oh, it must be because you're attracted to her." And I'm like, Couldn't possibly because I'm an election integrity activist and she's the only candidate here who actually addresses election integrity on both sides of the fence. Couldn't possibly be it. Couldn't be because I'm a foreign policy buff and I care about foreign policy as much as I care about domestic policy. And she's the only one who seems to care as much as I do on the stage. It couldn't possibly be that. It had to be because she was a woman. And I mean, there are people that I know that defended Tulsi who were Bernie supporters primarily. They endorsed Bernie, but just by saying something positive about Tulsi, they were maligned. And so what we saw, I mean, she's supposedly a Russian asset as a current service member, right? Who formerly sat, or now even still to this day, sits on committees that would require a top secret clearance that of course you have to go through a very thorough background check in order to sit on. And yet people pretend like she's some type of foreign asset for doing nothing more than criticizing the Democratic Party. And they always used to call her, remember, they used to call her a closet Republican. And I just find that laughable because as we just seen during the convention, they're not just bringing Republicans on, which normally I guess wouldn't actually be a bad thing because I like when you see people reach over to the other side of the aisle. But we know that's not why they brought them on. They brought them on to pander so they can try to steal some of Trump's voters. But these aren't just Republicans they brought on. They brought on Cheney. You know what I'm saying? They brought on like neocons, straight up fascists. And yet, and so even if you were calling Tulsi a quote unquote closet Republican, why should that be seen as such an insult to her when you clearly need them enough that you invite them over to your convention? When I doubt seriously that the Republicans will be paying that same respect.
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel like the Democrat and Republican parties are becoming more the same. Most people who are not close observers, they think they're becoming polar opposites, but I only see that on a couple hot button issues like guns and immigration, maybe. Like they just choose like two or three.
Even they pretend to be different on that, but they're really not.
Yeah, it's all just visual platitudes. So they convince us that they're so different when they're really just both authoritarian, centrist, corporate controlled monstrosities, and they vote the same on almost everything. So if you have someone who is truly outside the box, like Tulsi or like Ron Paul, they do everything they can to crush those people, even though those people are professing the ideas that the parties like to say that they're supporting. I mean, the Republicans, fiscal responsibility, respecting individual rights, that is not Mitt Romney. Like that would be Ron Paul. Or the idea of being for the people, for workers, protecting the environment, that is Tulsi Gabbard. That is
exactly. It's bizarre because Tulsi when we look at something like the environment, for example, Tulsi might have been, as far as at least recent history is concerned, the Democrats' best that they've ever put up. And in the same primary where climate change was such a huge conversation, it was only Tulsi who had made it a huge conversation before the primary was concerned. So clearly it wasn't like a political tactic. It wasn't her trying to hijack the conversation for political points. It was, no, I genuinely believe in this. And that's where I diverge with a lot of progressives today. It's because when we're talking about climate and environmental justice, that's something I believed in for a while. And that's one of the reasons I support Tulsi. Civil liberties, something I believed in for forever, really. The bravery of Chelsea Manning, Julian Assange, what's his name, Edward Snowden, what they have revealed. Tulsi even said Edward Snowden's revelations actually led to action in Congress. So she had supported civil liberty. So even where in the past, a while ago, she may have been misguided, still compared to her counterparts and her colleagues, she was still better on a lot of these issues. And so once again, it's just natural for somebody like you or myself to gravitate towards issues that we would consider populist issues. In other words, these affect everybody, and if we don't deal with these baseline issues, then nothing else matters. And once again, that's why I gravitated towards a candidate like Tulsi.
Yeah, so I think that there are a couple Republicans that I sort of like Rand Paul, Thomas Massey, but by hitching their wagon to the Republican Party, which does not represent any of the views that they profess, I feel like they're actually doing a disservice. I think that they should be actively trying to completely destroy the Republican Party and get rid of it. I feel the same way about people on the left with the Democratic Party, and I know that's the way you feel. So could you just tell us how you feel about the Democratic Party in general and why it needs to go the way of the dodo bird?
Oh man, so for the same reason that you probably feel the Republican Party needs to be extinct, and I take it back to this. Let's look at the things that we're not allowed to discuss, because as a leftist, you're always conditioned to believe that some truisms are only held by the Republican Party. It can only be applied to the Republican Party. We're not allowed to say both parties are racist, and yet
Right.
and still, I know that Franklin Delano Roosevelt, somebody that people consider a progressive, somebody that people know was a Democrat, somebody that people would attribute a lot of economic success to in this country, which is debatable. I know that he passed or created the Federal Housing Administration through the New Deal that explicitly kept Black people from owning any homes in the suburbs, amongst a plethora of other things that were exclusionary to Black people. And of course, we know the number one way to create wealth in this country is statistically through home ownership. And so when you're looking at that, just that small example, why is that never discussed whenever Bernie Sanders talks about being the next Frank FDR? Why is it not addressing the problems that some of these politicians have used the Democratic brand to hide behind? Why is it that when we're looking at the most, in my opinion, probably one of the most impactful Democrats in history, which would be JFK, when did JFK become considered the most impactful? When he scrutinized both sides and the underground shadow organization that truly guides both teams. That is when he became a champion for both, I would say, conservatives and liberals and progressives alike. And of course, we know that's also when he was taken out, but that goes to say something. And when you're looking at the greatest civil rights leaders of our time, whether it be Fred Hampton, Martin Luther King, at one point Angela Davis, I mean, any of them, it's just imagine walking up to them, like if Malcolm X was alive today, and saying, "Hey, Malcolm X, which racist are you going to vote for this time? Which, you know what I'm saying? Like, because there's no possible way that Malcolm X and Martin Luther King would have been taken seriously unless they endorsed a presidential candidate. Come on, that's ludicrous. They knew the reason that JFK got moved left on civil rights issues was because none of the civil rights activists were shy about the fact that we don't really care who you are. We don't care if you're Republican or Democrat. We don't care if you're Nixon or Kennedy. The truth is, we are going to make sure that we push you on these civil rights issues, that we hold you accountable regardless. And because of that dedication to accountability, Lyndon B. Johnson, who was an open racist, was forced to sign the civil rights legislation that ultimately led to desegregation. So, like, that's what can be achieved. And because of the Democratic Party's ability to kind of co-opt a lot of the great civil rights activists of this particular era, I would say within the 21st century, they are particularly dangerous. Because when you have people like Cornel West, as much as I have a great amount of respect for Cornel West, of course, when he, as who's considered a civil rights activist, says, "Well, I just see no choice but to endorse Biden because, well, I think that Trump is a neo-fascist," and I'm thinking to myself, so what do you call Biden? You know what I'm saying? Like, I
Yeah.
call it civility fascism. That's what he is, because you're not even allowed to question Biden's fascism. What do you call it when your son dies from cancer, and instead of advocating for more affordable cancer medication, you use your VP status to threaten sanctions on any country who decides they want to try to make cancer drugs more affordable? What is that? What do you call that? Like, people are trying to make sure others can't die, and use your authority to make sure they can't do it.
Yeah, so I mean, the argument you just made against the Democrat Party, I would also make, and I would also make a similar one just on different issues against the Republican Party, because things that I believe in, they have co-opted into their message, but then in action, they don't follow through on any of them. So they are much more dangerous to, so like the idea of a free market, the Republicans are way more dangerous to the idea than Bernie Sanders is. Bernie Sanders does not do anything to hurt that message. It's when Donald Trump says we will never have a socialist country, and then he signs the CARES Act into law. That is.
I'm like, I don't think you understand how this socialism thing, at least in the way they characterize it, works, right? It's always like they're taking from the poor people and then put it in the hands of the richest people in the country, and it's like, I don't know if y'all been watching, but that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened.
Yeah, exactly. So I think you and I have a lot more in common than Donald Trump and Joe Biden, than we do with Donald Trump or Joe Biden or the Republicans in general. But I feel that I'm going to blame both libertarians and progressives. They have drawn each other as absolute enemies. And I think that's because they don't actually know that much about them. And it's easier to cast someone as your enemy if you've built up a straw man in your mind. So
I'll take it a step even further than that. I would say that there's been a concerted effort from the powers that be to co-opt both ideologies, and even the Green Party and Libertarian Party to a degree, in different ways. But like, for example, a lot of people don't consider the new Libertarian Party the quote unquote Libertarian Party of Ron Paul, right? And I think even Ron Paul said that himself. But that doesn't mean you don't represent or at least try to represent what the best of what Ron Paul is bringing to the table. Ron Paul was against corporate lobbying, like he was against that type of corporate elitist influence. And yet some libertarians in the party they do feel the same way. The problem is the ones who seemingly end up with all the power don't. And on the Green Party, they use their obscurity to get away with nonsense all the time. Howie Hawkins cheated to get his nomination this year. And so people always ask me, what are you gonna, and that's a long story, but basically he doesn't even care. He's made it clear. He's just, this is just me using my experience no, he literally cheated. They don't even have an ethics committee in the Green Party. They're actively, after gaining so much momentum in the Jill Stein era, they're throwing it all away in the election that you could probably gain the most support. And so what we're told is this new Libertarian Party is representative of everything you stand for. And then, of course, y'all told that this nonsense with the Green Party and some of the virtue signaling that we see on the left from the people who call themselves progressives is supposed to be representative of us. And that's simply not true. When you're having one-on-one conversations with each other, you come to realize that you tend to agree on more things that you don't. And the things that we disagree on, it's usually some nuanced disagreement where you would have to kind of have that discussion anyway, like the policy discussion, to meet somewhere in the middle, hopefully using the best of both worlds to make something great.
Yeah, so I want you to articulate what your worldview is, as condensed as you can, just because I want people who watch this channel to hear what it means to be a progressive, because there are so many people who use that label, like Hillary Clinton, Bill Maher, AOC. I mean, Tulsi didn't even use that label to describe herself. I mean, it's just such
She's probably smart.
Yeah, it's got so much baggage with it. So I want you to explain what it means to you, just so people can hear it.
Yeah, no, it's crazy because like you hear all those people who probably represent different branches of the left all call themselves progressives. And I would say that I'm probably more of the populist progressive. So in other words, I don't support big government running everything. And why? Because once again, I know my history. I know that the Eisenhower was caught spying on Martin Luther King. I know that they used to call everybody, like including the Black Panthers, communists, not because of them, like their political ideology, but because that was the only buzzword you had to assign to them in order to violate all of their rights. And I don't ever want the government to be that big again. Literally, the government was the reason, like I said, that we were not allowed to own homes, that redlining exists, that 93% of our education is funded through property taxes, only 10% is funded through the federal government. Like, even though obviously the federal government takes more of my money than the state does, especially here in Florida. So I don't support big government, although I do believe there's a place. I believe that place is actually supposed to be for accountability purposes, to expand rights, never to restrict rights. Like the NSA should have never existed under the federal government, period. Even the FBI should have only really been a state-to-state agency. People can't say it's not possible because that's literally what the DMV is, and the DMV is like weird. It's kind of like half private, half government, but it can't exist state to state. It already exists state to state, matter of fact. But yet we have somebody who is an elected official then get to appoint someone without our consent, and that's, in my opinion, a violation. It's federal overreach, and every appointment at the federal level is overreach. I believe there should probably be way more elections as far as these agencies and offices are concerned than there are right now. Most progressives, I would say, are half on the Second Amendment. They believe in the Second Amendment, but they believe in accountability, of course, and they believe in like assault weapons bans and things like that. However, I would say probably over the last 2 years, once again, I know my history and I can't pretend like if I talk about election integrity, right? If I understand the corruption that the government has been involved in, there was a story this morning that just came out that said that so these 3 men are about to be released from jail because it turned out they were laundering money, right, for cocaine money, and it turned out it was the FBI who made them do it. So they're about to be released from jail, right? So if I'm looking at what's happening there, if I'm looking at what's happening with these protests, if I'm looking at what's happening with the way that people are being abducted, then I can't in good conscience not be a Second Amendment absolutist, because the whole reason the Second Amendment was created, not just to protect from foreign enemies, but domestic ones as well. And if you look currently, I think that everybody kind of agrees that the government, as it currently stands, the majority of those people there are, in fact, enemies of the people. At the very bare minimum, they're adversarial. And so when you think about that perspective and the fact that half of the Second Amendment has been erased, and you kind of have to question, well, is there a reason for that? And there is. Like, nobody ever talks about the militia aspect. Nobody ever talks about the fact that the militias are supposed to be the police department and basically the National Guard of your city and state. And everybody, at least the men, and probably would have evolved into the women too, everybody learn how to use a gun responsibly. The government very rarely thought that they can just run into any given state and just wreak havoc on any given town, because everybody had a weapon and everybody knew how to use it for the most part. And those were the police departments. And so because of that, you didn't have to deal with situations with police brutality like you see today. Why? Because they're coming from that community. And you're not going to kill your neighbor's son or beat the hell out of your teacher's daughter, or the person who's teaching your child, their daughter. Like, that's not how it works. And so the executive branch, once again using federal overreach, completely got rid of militias. And now we have the National Guard. And so I'm like one of those like Second Amendment absolutists where I feel like we don't have enough power to defend ourselves from the government right now, and that has to be reconciled. Now, on the other side of that fence, when it comes to social justice issues, I'm very aware of Black plight, as I just once again explained. When you had laws not 400 years ago, not 300 years ago, not 200 years ago, but redlining, one of the policies that came through the Federal Housing Administration that once again was passed or created by FDR, the last case of redlining was 2015. You know what I'm saying? 93% of all education is funded through property taxes. That's a Jim Crow law. That is a Jim Crow law. And so I am not going to sit here and ignore the reality of what Black people in this country and brown people in this country have dealt with. Now, I am also, so even though I'm about reconciliation, I'm also, I'm like live and let live when it comes to a lot of social justice issues. And so I'm just not about being in other people's business, man. I just don't. Like when the whole LGBTQ thing, well, I think it was 2014, whenever it finally got legalized, the equitable rights for marriage. Bro, I was like, why do y'all care so much about these people going about their lives? Because the Bible told me I have to, like, if you worry about your damn self, maybe you wouldn't have as many problems as you have right now. How about that? Like, and so I could care less
Like I want everybody, as long as they're not harming anyone, to be able to live the life that they choose to live. And I believe that healthcare is a right. I 100% believe that, because as we are entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Life, you kind of have to have good healthcare for life. Liberty, are you truly free if you don't have your health? You cannot be. You're a slave, especially in this world. You can be, in this country specifically, you can be a slave to your job and your bills when it comes to your health care. Just to be able to get health care. And then, of course, the pursuit of happiness, which you cannot be truly happy if you do not have your health. And so, although there is an appropriate way to address that, and it's probably going to require a mixed bag of solutions, like single payer plus, like what Tulsi was offering. I do believe healthcare is a right. So basically, I just believe in things that, like, I feel like society, I consider myself to be progressive because I believe in the things that society just naturally has to go through in order to progress and evolve. And when people just kind of like want to return to these draconian thought processes without actually analyzing the history of that, I just feel like it's because they're personally benefiting from them at the time, or at least they think they might. So, of course, you'll see people like Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz or these neocons or even the Joe Bidens, right? Or the Kamala Harrises. Kamala was able to thrive by screwing over black people. Biden, like, whenever, regardless of whether or not you believe in it, Biden, everybody on the left was screaming defund the police. And this man Biden said, oh, so you mean give him $300 million and then make one a VP? Is that what you meant? Like, they don't care, but it's because if you look at Kamala's career, this is how she made her career. If you look at Biden's career, screwing over black people is literally how he made his career. And so they have no incentive to progress and evolve. But I do believe that that's, once again, one thing that progressives and libertarians largely agree on.
Yeah. So I do have to make a note on the Second Amendment. You need to talk to Tulsi about that, because that was my role in her campaign. I was trying to get her to be a Second Amendment absolutist because it was the number one issue keeping people from voting for her. So you got to call her, talk to her about that. But everything you said
it's a recent evolution for me too. And I wouldn't say recent, but it's, I guess, my conviction. I believe in the Second Amendment, but my conviction there has recently been reshaped, especially because I saw, I'm sure you've seen the NFAC group, and you see them walking around with assault rifles, not assault rifles, I should say. Well, I guess they could be considered assault rifles, but basically, walking around with ARs. And guess what? Not a single one of them has been beat. Not a single one of them has been shot. None of them have been taken to jail. None of them have been kettled and tear gassed. None of them. And it might be coincidence, but I'm pretty sure it had something to do with that gun in their hand. But I might be jumping to conclusions. Yeah.
No, I mean, that's exactly the way I've always looked at it. So hopefully she goes through an evolution on it too. What you just laid out there, I totally agree. I mean, I think progressivism and libertarianism both have bad branding issues. I'd say the libertarians, it's because of the Koch brothers and, some bullshit happened there. And then with progressives, it's people like Cenk Uygur, using that label. So what I really want, I've been focusing a lot on what I call, and other people call, bottom unity, the idea that we believe in the autonomy over ourselves and a government that protects our rights. And that has to come first, because no matter what we disagree on after that, if we don't agree on that fundamental idea that we all have individual rights and that the government is supposed to respect them and work for us, then we can't get anywhere. But, there's a lot of political minutia that, is, as you said, mostly just small details about how we work it out that keeps these two components separate. And, I'm going to accuse Jo Jorgensen of this a little bit, what she said about Tulsi Gabbard a couple months ago.
That was completely out of left field, by the way.
Yeah, it was. It was just terrible. And I made a video about it. What I will say that she said that was true, when she said she was the most dangerous candidate, the way I took that was, okay, yeah, because I would be voting for her right now if she had won. And not. So, that's where that comes from. But
in that sense, she was absolutely correct, but I don't think that's how she meant it, given the context.
I am just sick of this divide, and I want us to come together. And unfortunately, we're going to have to do it under some sort of banner for now. I believe we should have a future with no political parties, but to break this duopoly system, I think we do need to come together. And I'm seeing in the Libertarian Party, there's a left caucus that Vermin Supreme sort of started, and I'm seeing a lot of people
really
who voted for Bernie and voted for Tulsi. They're going into the Libertarian Party. I just want some sort of unity to crush this horrible system we have, and then once we get rid of it, we can start arguing about the small differences we have, and we can tell the authoritarians to screw off. So what's your, what do you think is the way forward? Because the right unity doesn't work, the left unity doesn't work, and the right libertarian and the left libertarian, they're certainly not big enough to take on anything themselves. So
yeah, and so at that point, so I've always had somewhat of an issue with party politics, and it's because the way that parties are set up, they're private entities. Like technically speaking, I think they're 501c4s, and so with that comes like this embedded corruption that naturally happens, whether it be just because that might be human nature, I don't know, but I hate to say this, but party politics is basically where movements go to die, and that's what history tells me. Now, where we've seen the most change is kind of like like I said, what Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and a lot of these people did. They were focused but decentralized, and that focus was on the issues. They talked about imperialism. They talked about the color revolution, basically. Or the Rainbow Coalition. There you go. And what that is they talk about imperialism. They talk about populism, healthcare, UBI if you support that. But they have like a baseline set of issues that they organize behind. And the truth is, like, I'm gonna be real, even that has begun to be co-opted. But if you look at, the Sunrise Movement. The Sunrise Movement is full of shit, for the most part. Not the state organization, that's different, but the national organizations are the ones controlling their conversation. And they take a bunch of money from George Soros, as Robbie Yeager from our network has uncovered. They might do a little bit of good stuff, but like they also try to claim that Elizabeth Warren was somehow better than Tulsi on climate change, right? And then they even gave Tulsi, if I recall, a D when she was the best. So why is that? You can just follow the money. Look at Code Pink. Code Pink, when it first came out, was Medea Benjamin's organization, and because she was adamantly against the Iraq War. It's the same Medea Benjamin who organized them whenever the women were, quote unquote, were organizing a women march, even though it was just a neoliberal AstroTurf campaign. Medea Benjamin was organizing the women's march on the Pentagon. So like this woman is certified. She's anti-war and anti-imperialist as it comes, but because of the nature of nonprofits, obviously Code Pink got taken over, and so basically. It requires like this level of re-education, but also like we have to, I don't want to say separate ourselves from organizations, because we can't really do that, like realistically speaking, but you can kind of belong or support an organization, but at the end of the day, your core support has to be for the issue. And if you ever see the organization deviating from that issue, you got to be willing to call them out and hold them accountable. Because I think that's a lot of why some of these organizations and these politicians, and even like the Libertarian Party in some instances and the Green Party and others, why they feel so comfortable with just saying, screw them. Because, when your whole argument for voting for them is, well, the other side's worse. Well, the other side's worse. Well, the other side's worse. That's literally this. We've basically been hearing the same argument 4 times from 4 different parties in different ways. And nobody is saying, well, we have to do our best to win votes by focusing on the things that, focusing on the issues that make us who we are. And like I said, the Green Party, for example, doesn't even have an ethics committee. The idea of it was scoffed at. I know, because I know the person who was inquiring about it. And they Howie Hawkins, that's not my control, I can't do anything about that. When they talked to the people at the head of the Green Party, wouldn't do it. So, when we get people behind the issues, some organizations may spring up because of those issues, but if we focus on the issues more than loyalty to any particular organization or these fake litmus tests that we see, then I think that would be the way that we finally are able to overcome this duopoly, by make them, kind of acquiesce to us rather than the other way around.
Yeah, I mean, a perfect example of that would be the Tea Party, which was all about fiscal conservatism, and then they endorsed Trump in the end. And it's like, okay, there's an organization who the morals do not drive the organization drives the morals, basically what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
The last subject I wanted to touch on is, what do you think about the current election right now? Because I see a lot of progressives, they're throwing everything behind the idea that Trump is going to stomp Biden. And first of all, I don't think that's going to happen. I actually believe Biden is going to win by a slight margin. So they're putting all their chips on that idea. So if Biden wins...
Really? I haven't seen a lot of progressives saying... I've seen more progressives saying that... I've seen progressives begin to kind of move on and just they don't have any hopeful expectations, but they're assuming Trump is going to win.
Okay.
I kind of hope that Trump stomps Biden, but that's a different discussion.
Right. So what is the movement forward if Trump wins? What is it if Biden wins? Does it matter? Are they basically the same animal?
Oh, man. Whew. So if Trump wins... basically more of the same, I guess. Actually, Trump is interesting because there's a potentiality for Trump to actually move left on some issues, not because he's altruistic or anything, but because it would be good for his ego and they can't threaten him. The Republicans wouldn't be able to threaten him with not supporting a re-election bid. And so there's always a weird, it can go either way type of thing whenever the person isn't seeking re-election. And Trump is about as unpredictable as they come.
Right.
So he just is. He's kind of scary, unpredictable. Like, honestly, I wasn't expecting the executive order for the extension for the unemployment benefits. I thought he was going to go the way of Congress and just kind of screw us. And at the very bare minimum, we can complain about people say, well, I wanted the 600. I'm like, okay, well, that's cool. But at a certain point, you do have to kind of reach a middle ground. And I think the 400, where the state helps out for the 100, is definitely beneficial, considering that Congress's option was zero. That's what they were offering you. And also, Trump's executive order kind of undercut the whole corporate bailout aspect of the legislation that we got before, which nobody's actually discussing. So that's a good thing. Like, that's kind of like, oh, well, when you put it like that, it makes sense. This actually might be a little bit something that we should be talking about and celebrating and encouraging more of. But on the other side of that, but you do have the threat of genuine fascism with Trump. You do have that threat. He allowed Betsy DeVos' brother to go have his private contract, just abduct people. It's kind of hard to ignore that. Now, it's not unique. That's what's weird about it. That's like, some people think it's unique under Trump. It's just known under Trump. But Barack Obama was taking very similar action to the protesters in Baltimore, in Ferguson, in Standing Rock. I was there for Standing Rock. I was, present essentially I was paying attention very closely to the Ferguson thing. And now a lot of people are coming out and saying, hold up, there are a lot of protesters who are actually still missing from Ferguson. A lot of activists, leaders, that are still missing from Ferguson. So clearly, this is non-unique to Trump. The only thing that is unique to Trump is that his fascism is being put on full display. Now, you're on the other side of that fence, you have something that's slightly more dangerous, in my opinion, which is what I like to call civility fascism. In other words, it is fascism that you are not allowed to address, that you are not allowed to call out, that you are not allowed to criticize, because the other fascism is worse. But that's basically what you get with Biden. Why are we pretending like this man didn't say he didn't want his kids to grow up in a racial jungle? Why? In what world? Apparently this timeline. Okay, so I can't say in what world anymore. In this world, in this timeline, we have a party that spent the first half of the primary touting its diversity, only to nominate the man who quite literally said he didn't want his kids to grow up in a racial jungle, and then told us we better not say anything about it or we're secretly Russian assets or neo-fascists ourselves. That is dangerous, bro. That is a different type of dangerous, because look at what happened on Occupy. Occupy was infiltrated. This is like a well-known fact. They were infiltrated, and Obama led that charge. And then they had their movement co-opted, if you remember, and everybody to tout Warren's CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. But what they don't say is that was just a Trojan horse so they can get Dodd-Frank through. So they use Occupy, Warren, and then the CFPB subsequently to get Dodd-Frank pushed through and made the banks bigger. So when you have civility fascism, where you can bomb 7 nations and get a Nobel Peace Prize, I think that most people, when explained to it like that, it could be potentially more dangerous.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I want to thank you for coming on the show. I think if the term progressive is going to survive, which I don't think it should, but if it does, you should be the standard bearer of it, not the people who currently.
That.
I'll just give you the last word if you want people to follow you on social media, if there's anything they can do to hear your message.
So you can follow me on Twitter at NikoCSFB. If you have a Rockfin account, you can follow me on rockfin.com/Niko. I'm actually, you can follow my YouTube page, the MCSC Network, but I'm also running this little experiment to see if they will censor my other YouTube page. Like I have an individual one where because basically I started getting hit super hard specifically when Tulsi started her lawsuit against Google because we were talking about Tulsi a lot. And obviously YouTube is owned by Google. So I'm interested to see if I don't dedicate any videos on that channel to Tulsi in the beginning, how much momentum we can pick up. So you can just look up my name, NikoHousc, and subscribe to that page because I'll be posting a lot of videos there as well. So yeah, you can follow me on Twitter, follow me on YouTube as well. And appreciate you having me on, man.